Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at the fitness tracker that kept counting steps after a husband said his wife was dead, and the one thing the people closest to it never noticed. December 23rd, 2015. 2 days before Christmas. A cold Wednesday morning in Ellington, Connecticut. The kind of morning where the furnace runs all night and the roads are still glazed at sunrise. At 10:11 a.m., a man picks up the phone in his own house and dials 911. He tells the dispatcher a masked intruder broke into his home and shot his wife. He sounds panicked. He says she's on the floor, she's not moving. Police arrive fast. They find her in the house. Dead. Single gunshot wound. The husband is in the basement, zip-tied to a folding chair. Small burn on his body. Some scrapes. He's alive. His story is detailed. A big man in camouflage. A knife. A blowtorch. A struggle. Then a gunshot. The intruder fled. The husband survived. The wife didn't. It's the kind of story that holds up if nobody checks the small things. But Connie had something small with her. A Fitbit. And it was still recording. That device didn't care about the husband's story. It just counted steps. And the steps it counted made his version of events impossible. Their names were Richard and Connie Dabate, married since 2003. 2 young sons living on Birchview Drive in Ellington, a quiet town about 20 miles northeast of Hartford. Ellington is the kind of place where people leave their doors open. About 15,000 residents. Farmland at the edges. Not the kind of town where home invasions happen. Richard worked in IT. Connie worked at a local business. From the outside, they looked like a normal suburban family getting ready for the holidays. That morning, Connie left home around 8:45. She was headed to a spin class at the YMCA in South Windsor. Her Fitbit was with her. It logged the morning. Richard stayed behind. He told police he was in the basement, working from home on his laptop. The house was quiet. The kids were at school or with family. Then, according to Richard, he heard a noise upstairs. Something that didn't belong. He went up to check, and there was a man standing in the hallway. Richard described the intruder in detail. About 6'2", heavy build, wearing camouflage, a dark mask, carrying a knife in one hand. He said the man forced him back down the basement stairs, pushed him into a folding chair, bound his wrists behind the back of the chair with zip ties, then his ankles. Then, according to Richard, the man reached into a bag and pulled out a small blowtorch, the kind you buy at a hardware store, the kind people use to caramelize creme brulee. Richard said the intruder burned him while demanding valuables. Cash, electronics, whatever was in the house. Richard cooperated. He told the man where things were. Then they both heard a sound from upstairs, the garage door opening. Connie was coming home. She'd cut her gym trip short and returned to the house. According to Richard, the intruder went upstairs toward the garage entrance. There was a confrontation, then a single gunshot, then silence. Richard said the intruder came back down to the basement, pointed a gun at Richard, fired once and missed. Then the intruder left through a door and was gone. Richard said he struggled against the zip ties and managed to reach the alarm keypad mounted on the wall. He hit the panic button. The alarm company called 911. The call was logged at 10:11 a.m. When officers arrived, the house was quiet. Connie was dead on the floor. Richard was still tied to the chair. The intruder was nowhere to be found. On the surface, it looked like a home invasion that ended in murder. A violent stranger. A wife in the wrong place at the wrong time. A husband who barely survived. Richard's story had the right ingredients. Specific details. A physical description of the attacker. Injuries on his own body. A scared, cooperative victim who'd been overpowered. But detectives don't run on ingredients. They run on evidence. And the evidence in this case was already pulling in a different direction. Start with the injuries. Richard described a drawn-out, violent attack. A knife pressed against him, a blowtorch on his skin, being held down and interrogated by a large armed man. But look at what the paramedics found when they cut him loose. The zip tie marks were light, the pink line you'd leave on your own wrist if you tightened a bracelet too hard and took it off a minute later. The burn was small, not the blistered, raw wound a sustained blowtorch leaves on skin, more like a brief contact, like something had been held against him for seconds, not minutes. The scrapes were shallow. For a man who said he'd been tied down and burned by a violent intruder, Richard's body told a quiet story. The damage was minimal, almost careful. Then the entry point. Richard said a 6'2" man forced his way into the house, but crime scene techs found no signs of forced entry that matched that story. No broken locks, no pried windows, no boot prints on a kicked-in door, no tool marks on any frame. The house looked like what it was, a home where the people inside had keys. If the gap between what Richard said and what the evidence shows is pulling you in, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe. We do this twice a week. The described intruder, 6'2", heavy, camouflage, dark mask, didn't match any known suspect in the Ellington area. No matching DNA was recovered from the scene. No neighbor saw anyone fitting that description near the house that morning. No vehicle was spotted leaving the area. The phantom intruder left no trace beyond Richard's words. Investigators pulled the home alarm system data. The system logged every time a door or window opened or closed. It kept timestamps down to the minute. The alarm data showed door openings and closings, but the pattern didn't match Richard's account of when the intruder entered and when he left. The doors opened at the wrong times. Then there was Facebook. A post went live from Connie's account at 9:46 a.m. on December 23rd. In Richard's timeline, she was already dead. Investigators checked whether the post had been scheduled in advance or pushed from a different device. It was another timestamp that didn't sit cleanly inside Richard's version of the morning. And then the motive. Detectives started asking the questions you ask when a husband is the last person with his wife. Was the marriage solid? Was he seeing anyone? Was there money in play? They got 3 answers, and the answers lined up. Richard Dabate was having an affair. He'd been seeing another woman for some time, and she was pregnant with his child. The other woman gave birth in June of 2016, 6 months after Connie died. That timing wasn't lost on detectives. Richard also had a life insurance policy on Connie. The marriage was under strain. He had a new relationship, a child on the way, and a wife standing between him and the life he wanted. Every new detail pulled at a different thread in Richard's story. The injuries were too light. The entry point didn't exist. The alarm data didn't match. The motive was right there. But the thread that pulled hardest came from a device so small most people forget they're wearing one. It ripped the whole story apart. Connie Dabate used a Fitbit activity tracker, a small consumer device built to log movement through the day. She used it regularly. December 23rd was no different. When Connie left for the gym that morning, the Fitbit went with her. It logged the morning, and it was still logging once she was back at the house. And when she died, the Fitbit data was still there, synced, stored, waiting for investigators to pull it apart. They pulled the data from Fitbit's servers with a warrant. A small spreadsheet, timestamps down to the second. A column of step counts next to a column of times, and what the detectives read in that file broke Richard's story in half. The Fitbit showed continuous movement. Steps from the time Connie came back to the house until approximately 10:05 a.m. Not a handful of steps, not a brief walk from the car to the door. Sustained movement. The device logged 1,217 feet of movement inside the house. 1,200 feet. That's not a woman who walked in through the garage and was shot on arrival. That's a woman moving through the house for a long stretch of time, room to room, pass after pass. Richard dialed 911 at 10:11 a.m. He told the dispatcher his wife had been shot by an intruder, but the Fitbit said she was still alive and walking at 10:05, just 6 minutes earlier. In Richard's version, the intruder shot Connie when she came through the door. That would have been shortly after 9 a.m., more than an hour before the Fitbit stopped recording her steps. An hour. 60 minutes of walking that his story said didn't happen. 1,200 feet of movement that his timeline couldn't account for. This is the crack. Not a fingerprint, not a witness, not a confession, a consumer step tracker that kept doing its job. The device didn't know it was collecting evidence. It didn't know a crime had been committed. It was doing what it always did, counting steps, measuring distance, saving data. But those steps told a story Richard couldn't rewrite. Connie was alive and moving inside that house at a time when he'd already committed to saying she was dead. Richard built his alibi around a timeline. The Fitbit destroyed that timeline with raw data. Steps and timestamps. Nothing more, nothing less. The arrest warrant affidavit laid it out plainly. Connie's Fitbit showed her walking through the house well past the point Richard claimed the attack was already over. His intruder story couldn't survive that data. Richard Dabate was arrested on April 13, 2017, about 16 months after Connie's death. The charges were heavy. Murder, tampering with physical evidence, making a false statement to police. If convicted on all counts, he faced decades behind bars. He posted bail, and for the next 5 years, Richard Dabate walked free while the case moved through the courts. During that time, he had a second child with the woman he'd been seeing while married to Connie. 5 years between arrest and trial. 5 years of motions and hearings and delays. The wheels of the court system turned slowly. Connie's family waited. The case finally went to trial in the spring of 2022, and Richard made a decision that surprised legal observers. He waived his right to a jury. He chose a bench trial, no 12 jurors, no deliberation room, just a single judge hearing the evidence and deciding the verdict alone. His fate would rest with Judge Corinne Klatt of Rockville Superior Court. The prosecution built its case on the digital evidence. The Fitbit data sat at the center. Around it, the alarm system logs, the Facebook post timestamp, the phone records, each piece reinforcing the next. Layer by layer, the state showed that every key timestamp in Richard's story was wrong. The doors opened at times that contradicted his account. The Fitbit placed Connie alive when he said she'd stopped moving, and the Facebook timestamp added one more problem his timeline couldn't absorb. The defense pushed back on the Fitbit data. They argued the device could record phantom steps, false readings caused by arm movement or sensor glitches. They said the technology was too new to be trusted in a murder case. But 1,200 feet of phantom steps over the course of an hour. The judge wasn't buying it. On May 10, 2022, 6 years and 5 months after Connie's death, Judge Klatt delivered the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Felony murder. Tampering with physical evidence, making a false statement. The Fitbit data held up in court. A step counter designed for personal fitness had become the prosecution's most damaging piece of evidence. On September 1, 2022, Richard Dabate stood before Judge Klatt again for sentencing. She gave him 65 years. 65 years. Richard was 44 years old at sentencing. He'll be eligible for release when he's over 100. He gets to grow old inside a Connecticut prison while the child he was trying to clear the way for grows up outside it. For a crime he thought he'd explained away with a story about a man in camouflage who never existed. If you're watching this far, you care about the details that crack a case. Subscribe to Case Vault. We drop a new one twice a week, and the next crack is already waiting. This case set a marker in American criminal law. It became one of the most prominent early murder prosecutions in the country, where Fitbit data served as key evidence against the defendant. Since then, data from wearable devices has appeared in courtrooms across the country. Step counts, heart rate logs, GPS coordinates, sleep patterns, all of it time-stamped, all of it capable of ending up in evidence. Your phone knows where you are, your watch knows when you move, your car knows how fast you drove and where you parked. None of these devices were designed to be witnesses, but they can become them. They record without judgment. They store without asking permission. And when someone lies about a timeline, these devices don't argue. They just show the data. Richard Dabate built his defense around a story. The story had a timeline, and the timeline had a hole the size of 1,200 feet of footsteps. Connie's Fitbit didn't solve the case alone. The detectives did the work. They pulled the alarm data. They followed the affair. They built the case piece by piece over 16 months. But the Fitbit gave them the one thing Richard couldn't argue against: a number, a timestamp, and a fact that didn't bend to fit his story. 1,217 feet. That's how far Connie walked inside her own home on the last morning of her life, after her husband said she was dead. This wasn't some futuristic police gadget. It was an ordinary consumer tracker. The kind of thing people bought for steps, clipped on or wore, and stopped thinking about by lunch. Connie Dabate wore hers every day. That morning she clipped it on before spin class like she had every morning for months. And after she died, it kept counting. Quietly, precisely, indifferent to the man downstairs rehearsing a story about an intruder. 6 years later, in a courtroom 2 counties away, that indifference was the one thing the defense couldn't argue with. A small consumer tracker still counting steps inside a house where the story had already gone bad. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.